Now, are there any questions about last week's class? I was supposed to stop at 12:30 because they're not going to ring a bell. But normally I don't hear a bell anyway. But I do stop when the children come down. No questions about last week's class? Okay. Although I said last week that it was our 12th lecture, Nancy pointed out to me that it was only our 11th. Math was never really my strong point. Now, in our treatment of biblical economics, we've examined in some detail Israel's adoption of a monarchy toward the end of the 11th century. We devoted the last several classes to the reign of Israel's third king, Solomon, in the middle of the 10th century. Now, in this period of Israel's history, we may justly speak of an empire. Way up on the northeast corner at Thapsacus, which is the ford over the Euphrates River, the one that's described, for example, by Xenophon and Nabasus. Israel even controlled Thapsacus, and all the way down, going straight south, all the way down to the Gulf of Aqaba, the city of Eilat in the Gulf of Aqaba, which gave them access to the Red Sea, the Horn of Africa, all the way over to India. But that line running down the east side of the valley of Sea of Galilee and the Dead Sea, who remembers the name of that line? We spent quite a bit of time on it.
Oh, the King's Highway.
King's Highway. Very good. Thank you, Nancy. King's Highway. They controlled the King's Highway, which was the highway that linked Egypt to Mesopotamia. Extremely important from a mercantile perspective. So in this period, when we speak of an empire, because Solomon, like his father David, ruled over several other nations in a territory that spread from Syria in the northeast down to the border of Egypt in the southwest. I follow the dating, by the way. If you look these things up online, you'll find a variation of datings. I'm conservative. I was taught by people who actually lived at the period, so. So I still agree with Bright, and I think also William F. Albright, the dating Solomon's reign from 961 to 922. This was a period of great wealth and profound social and cultural change, and we've been all over that. We've gone into considerable detail. All empires, however, come to an end, including the one in which we belong right now. They all come to an end. I may add it parenthetically only, it appears to me we are approaching it. I think we're way past any kind of political solution to the disintegration of the current society. I don't see any possible. I hope I'm wrong, of course, but I don't see any possible political outcome to this. All empires come to an end, even those established by God. In Israel's case, the period of empire lasted less than a century. Its success and prosperity depended too much on a larger geopolitical picture that Israel was powerless to control, especially the decline of the Hittite Empire in the northwest and Egypt in the southwest. Israel's possibility of rising to empire depended these sources, as well as Mesopotamia being imperial in decline. Indeed, we can rightly say that without the genius of Israel's first three kings, Saul, who I think was the first one to envisage it was Saul, David and Solomon, men of great wisdom and foresight, there would never have been a time of empire in Israel's history. We are so accustomed to thinking of Jerusalem as a place of empire. In fact, we're so accustomed to thinking of the city of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Whereas the capital of Israel, about 75 years in all of world history. Only about 75 years. So we hear people, Jerusalem must be the capital of Israel. Because that's the ancient capital. It was only the capital of Israel for about 75 years. It just didn't, and we're coming to an end of it now. After 922 BC, it's no longer the capital of Israel. At the death of Solomon, as we shall see today, his empire dramatically collapsed. The Bible remembers Solomon as ruler of great wisdom. The Bible also records that Solomon's son was a consummate fool. I hope we get to the point where I can speak about him today. We can divide into two the many causes that brought about the political collapse of 922. The first group of causes included several internal tensions. For example, many Israelites never thought that the monarchy was a good idea in the first place. They regretted the loss of the older period, especially the tribal ties and local loyalties. At the beginning of the monarchy, around 1020, the judge and prophet Samuel was their spokesman. We'll be quoting him in just a moment. Another source of disquiet was the sudden, unprovoked introduction of taxes. You want to bring out an empire, just tax them. Just tax them. Particularly tax income. Tax household income. That'll finish off any society. Under the tribal governments, there was no such thing as taxes. Now, however, taxation became a burden, which increased with the growing complication of government itself. Government will grow. Unless you really work very hard to keep it from growing, it will grow. Samuel had warned the Israelites on this point, and that's your first text. 1 Samuel 8, starting verse 11. And Samuel said, "This will be the behavior of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them for his own chariots, and to be his horsemen, and some will run before his chariots. He will appoint captains over his thousands and captains over his 50s, and will set some to plow his ground and reap his harvest, and some to make his weapons of war and equipment for his chariots." Notice all this war, expansion of war, extension of war. "And he will take the best of your fields, your vineyards, your olive groves, and give them to his servants. And you will cry out in that day, because of your king whom you have chosen for yourselves, and the Lord will not hear you in that day." In addition, Solomon was an ambitious builder. The military and political needs of the kingdom required, for example, the construction of fortresses throughout the realm, sundry buildings for numerous government agencies, trading posts, There had to be a mail system, for example. They're dealing diplomatic relations with other countries, often by marriage. You wonder why Solomon has so many wives. I mean, besides the fact he was showing off, these are very often these were political alliances. Most significant was the building of the royal palace, and especially the construction and the maintenance of the temple. You have the text there, chapter 9 of 1 Kings. This was a very interesting text because there's so many threads in it. Now it happened at the end of 20 years. We put Solomon's reign from 961. You figure out what. Do the math yourself, because I've always told you I'm not good at that. When Solomon had built 2 houses, the house of the Lord and the king's house, Hiram, the king of Tyre, that's Phoenicia, Hiram, the king of Tyre, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress and gold, as much as he desired. King Solomon then gave Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Got that picture? This is a king down in Judah giving away 20 cities up on the border with Phoenicia for Galilean cities. How do you think they felt about that up in Galilee? Then Hiram, this next part is kind of funny. Then Hiram went from Tyre to see the cities which Solomon had given to him, but they did not please him. So he said, "What cities are these that you have given me, my brother?" And he called them Eretz Kabul, the land of useless. The land of useless. Eretz Kabul, as they are called to this day. Eretz Kabul. Observe here that the king, who is from a southern tribe and is constructing buildings in a southern city, pays for the construction by sacrificing 20 northern cities. I mean, suppose we had a debt to Canada, and we gave them Massachusetts and New York. Now, aside from universal applause that would bring in the rest of the nation, they might not like it in Connecticut. In this story, we gain an inkling of why, among the northern tribes, there was a growing discontent that Solomon fails to address. His son, as we shall see, eventually must pay for this neglect. Pardon me just a minute. This water is so delicious. Thank you, Father Deacon. I'm resolved from this moment on not to say anything more about contemporary events. I got no business doing that. At least not in public. I should privately yell it. Now, among the internal problems of Solomon's kingdom, we should list the growing influence of his many pagan wives. He got married a lot. A lot. The king maintained a considerable harem. You don't have this text. I wanted to keep my handouts down to 1 page, so I didn't give you every last text. We'll look. But at the beginning of chapter 11 of 1 Kings, King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, the Ammonites, the Edomites. These are all realms on the east of Israel. The Sidonians, the Phoenicians, and even the Hittites. From the nations of whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, "You shall not intermarry with them." We had that this morning, didn't we, in 2 Corinthians? The second step. Do not be unequally mated. You shall not intermarry with them, nor with they with you. Surely they will turn away your hearts after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For it was so when Solomon was old that his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not at peace with the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. And remember, David was guilty of adultery with the wife of a Hittite, whom he murdered with a plot. Now, David is being held up at the standard, and Solomon couldn't meet it. Now, we shall see in subsequent classes the spiritual danger of Solomon's domestic arrangements were especially severe in the case of the Phoenicians introduced into his court. You see, these women didn't just come on down. They brought their retinues with them. They also brought their private chaplains. How do you think the prophets of Baal get intermixed this far south? Solomon's introduction of Phoenician women into the royal court will be a problem for Israel well into the next century. In 1 Kings 11, we find the first rumblings of political turmoil, especially during the second half of Solomon's reign. These are just a few verses, but I have them on your paper. If everybody have a paper, by the way? Everybody have a text? Because there are more right here if you don't. Okay. Don't take these. Try that one over there. First, trouble broke out in the south, where Solomon controlled the Edomites, and therefore the port of Eilat, on the north end of the Gulf of Aqaba, which gave him access to the Red Sea, and every place further south, such as the Horn of Africa, over to the Arabian Peninsula, around the Bay of Biscay, over to India. Now the Lord raised up Now the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was a descendant of a king in Edom. Hadad fled to go into Egypt, which was a real easy trip. Just go south, go west. Solomon was apparently able to quell this rebellion by an Edomite royal prince, but the latter seeks refuge in the court of his neighbor in the southwest, the Pharaoh in Egypt. Notice that. This man seeks refuge in Egypt. Are we any longer dealing with the Pharaoh who is Solomon's father-in-law?
Oh, no.
No. No. Something has happened in Egypt. This tells us that there's been a big change in Egypt. This is surely not the father-in-law of Solomon. A few verses later, he will be identified. In addition to the Edomite rebellion in the south, Solomon is challenged by the Syrians in the northeast. Verse 23. And God raised up another adversary against him, Reardon, the son of Variata, who had fled from his lord Hadadezer, king of Zobah. We don't know how successful that rebellion was, but there's trouble up around the area, up the extreme northeast at the Thopsakos. Finally, Solomon is challenged from within Israel by a descendant of David. Pardon me, by a descendant of Joseph. How did I get David in there? By a descendant of Joseph. Verse 26. Then Solomon's servant Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Zereda, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. Solomon therefore sought to kill Jeroboam. But Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. Those of you who have been with me for some time, hey Scott, welcome sir. I see Scott has joined us. Who else has joined us? Richard has joined us. And I think that's all the new ones. And welcome everybody. Those of you who have been with me for a while, you know my fondness for Shishak. That famous incident when Shishak saved me in an exam for which I had not studied. In fact, I skipped all the classes and I had not gone to attended any of the classes. And I came to take the final exam in the course and I didn't know what they were going to ask me. And the professor looks at me, blinks a few times because he's never seen me before. He says, Signor Reardon, quid nam dicendum est Shishak? Mr. Reardon, what is to be said about Shishak? And I closed my eyes and said, Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, who hast had mercy upon thy servant. He asked me one question about which I know something. Now, with this explicit introduction of Shishak, we discern the geopolitical shift that makes all this rebellion possible. Saul, David, and Solomon had been able to transform Israel into a small empire because of the weakness of the 21st dynasty. No more. No more. 21st dynasty is gone. The year is 943. It's gone. A new pharaoh is in town. And the name of the town is Bubastis. I sort of wish your dad were here this morning. Because whenever I get down to Egypt, I kind of like to have your dad around because he really knows that subject. Yeah, but give him my regards, would you? This city, Bubastis, under Pharaoh Shishak I, became the new capital of Egypt, replacing the city of Tanis. In the Bible, Bubastis is known as Pi-Beseth. Ezekiel, in fact, refers to it in chapter 30, verse 17. Ezekiel refers to the city. This city, which became the capital for the 22nd dynasty, was located in the eastern Nile Delta. In Arabic, the site is now called Tel Basta. Tel means excavation site, Basta. That's not the Italian Basta. It's a different Basta. Its ruins are located in the suburbs of the modern city of Zagazig. In antiquity, Bubastis was famous as a religious center, especially for the worship of a feline goddess, Bastet. A feline goddess. Thus, Bubastis became a major depository for the mummified bodies of cats. I see that some of you are suddenly paying closer attention, a little more personal involvement. Okay. I was telling Denise about this at supper last night, and a cat looking up at me. I said, "Would you like to be mummified?" I mean, you never know. Times change. Now, it is sufficient to observe that the rise of Shishak in Egypt and his establishing of the 22nd dynasty brought about the dissolution of Solomon's empire and the dividing of his kingdom. Solomon died in 922. 1 Kings 11:43, you have that there. Then Solomon rested with his fathers, was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his place. Although Rehoboam became king by succession, as did Solomon himself, it was politically necessary for him to receive the approval and endorsement of all the 12 tribes, just as David had done. Are there any questions? I should have asked this before. Are there any questions so far? I want to make sure I'm not losing anything. So we reached the year 922. The assembly was assigned by common consent to the centrally located shrine at Shechem. This move was especially necessary with respect to Israel's northern tribes, a people touchy about their traditional rights and needing to be gently handled. The leadership of these northern tribes sent word down to Jeroboam, who was living in exile in Egypt as the guest of Pharaoh Shishak. The delegates from the northern tribes urged him to attend this meeting with the new king. 1 Kings chapter 12, verse 1. You're going to be getting an expression come through all through this text. Kol Israel, Kol Israel, all of Israel, all Israel, Kol Israel. And that means all of Israel, not just the Jews. All Israel. And Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all Israel had gone to Shechem to make him king. So it happened when Jeroboam the son of Nebat heard it, he was still in Egypt, for he had fled from the presence of King Solomon, had been dwelling in Egypt, that they sent and called him. So this Jeroboam comes back, the one that Solomon had tried to kill. He becomes the spokesman for the northern tribes. Chapter 12, you continue where we left off. Then Jeroboam and the whole assembly of Israel came and spoke to Rehoboam, saying, Your father made our yoke hard. Now therefore lighten the onerous service of your father and his heavy yoke, which he put on us, and we will serve you. They're asking for an accommodation. These northern tribes, for their part, seemed willing to be ruled by Rehoboam, but they craved assurance that the new king would respect their ancient traditions and customs and maybe lower their taxes. Truth be told, they had not been entirely happy with Rehoboam's father, Solomon. They sought from his son a simple pledge that their grievances would be taken seriously in the future. A great deal depended on Rehoboam's answer. The new king, for his part, is cautious at first. He wants counsel before he decides on a policy. So he wants 3 days to consider it, think it over. 1 Kings 12:5. So he said to them, Depart for 3 days, then come back to me. And the people departed. The new king apparently took the matter seriously because he sought counsel on what to say. He began by consulting the seniors of the royal court. The married men who had for 40 years provided guidance to his father. He took counsel of the old-timers, men who had been around, had experience. The men who had less testosterone active in their psyches, less to prove. These were the elder statesmen of the realm, those qualified to give the most prudent political counsel. Verse 6. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who stood before his father, Solomon, while he still lived, and he said, "How do you advise me to answer these people?" These older men, long familiar with the governing of the realm, urged Rehoboam in the direction of caution and moderation with respect to the northern tribes. Verse 7. And they spoke to him, saying, "If you will be a servant to these people today, and serve them, and answer them, and speak good words to them, then they will be your servants forever." Rehoboam, nonetheless, eschewing the instruction of the elders, decided to take counsel from his friends, his contemporaries, the people he grew up with, the people he'd gone to school with. Eschewing the instruction of his elders, he followed the impulses of his younger companions, who encouraged him to stand tough and not let himself be pushed around. That is to say, he consulted the gentlemen of junior high. Indeed, they urged Rehoboam to be insulting and provocative to the petitioners. Verse 8. But he rejected the advice which the elders had given him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him, who stood before him. And he said to them, "What advice do you give? How should we answer this people who have spoken to me, saying, 'Lighten the yoke of your father put on us'?" Then the young men who had grown up with him spoke to him, saying, "Thus you should speak to this people who have spoken to you, saying, 'Your father made our yoke heavy, but you make it lighter on us.' Thus shall you say to them, 'My little finger shall be thicker than my father's waist.'" That's not very nice. In other words, if my father had a heavy hand, mine can be a lot heavier. May I have a show of hands of those who think this is a prudent response to people who are oppressed? "And now, whereas my father put a heavy yoke on you, I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." This is called politics. Okay. A response like this, what would a response like this elicit in somebody who had Israel's memory? What does this sound like? It sounds like Pharaoh. We should be back in Egypt. Things were so much nicer in Egypt beside this king. King Rehoboam was acting, in fact, exactly like the ancient slaveholder in Egypt. Verse 12. So Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the third day, as the king had directed them, saying, "Come back to me the third day." Then the king answered the people harshly and rejected the advice which the elder had given him. And he spoke to them according to the advice of the young men, saying, "Your father made your yoke heavy, but I will add to your yoke. My father chastised you with whips, but I will chastise you with scorpions." So the king did not listen to the people, for the turn of events was from the Lord, that he might fulfill in his word, which the Lord had spoken to Ahijah the Shilonite, to Jeroboam the son of Nebat. I did not take that prophecy with you simply because I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's essentially political. Pursuing this foolish counsel, he immediately lost the larger portion of his kingdom. From that point on, Jerusalem was no longer the capital of whole Israel. Just Joseph.
I just wanted to point out there's a wonderful book by Barbara Tuchman called The March of Folly.
Thank you.
It talks about examples throughout history of stupid policies that cost them, like the British losing the 13 colonies.
Yeah, I don't know if they can hear you. Joseph was talking about Barbara Tuchman's book, The March of Folly. Thank you for that reminder. By the way, anything you read of Barbara Tuchman. The Guns of August, A Distant Mirror. I think I've read that book 10 times. A Distant Mirror. Anything by Barbara Tuchman. But The March of Folly. I'm saying that, repeating that for the purpose of the folks online hearing it. Yeah. Great political idiots. Of course, we don't have anything like that now, which is why I'm not going to comment. Verse 16. Now when all Israel saw that the king did not listen to them, the people answered the king, saying, "What share have we in David? We have no inheritance of the son of Jesse. To your tents, O Israel. Now see to your own house, O David." So Israel departed to their tents. They didn't actually live in tents, that's just an expression. But Rehoboam reigned over the children of Israel who dwelt in the cities of Judah. What shall we say of Rehoboam? He is almost the perfect example of what the Bible means by fool. Now, there's a lot of irony in this. He was the son of Solomon, a man known far and wide for his wisdom. This foolishness was not just a tragedy, it was full of irony. Because one of the major practical purposes of the book of Proverbs, a work attributed to Solomon, was to prevent and preclude exactly what happened. The book of Proverbs was written for adolescent men. Okay. For the control of adolescent men. If adolescent men are behaving themselves, everything will thrive. Even the girls will behave. According to Proverbs, the fool is the man who ignores the counsel of the old and follows the impulses of the young. Ignores the counsel of those who have experience for the sake of those who have had none. I just see, Kaylin, I hope you're not taking any of this personal. Okay? You're not one of these guys, Kaylin. Okay. Stefan, we didn't mean you either.
Rehoboam was 41. He was not a young man. I mean, not.
He's 41, he's not a young man?
Well, he's not an adolescent king. He was 41.
You call 41 a young man? What am I to say? Point made. I suppose that's fine. I guess by biblical standards, you're all kind of kids. You know, when you get people living hundreds of years, you know. Now, many a life has been ruined. In this case, a kingdom lost, because someone preferred the pooled stupidity of his contemporaries to the accumulated wisdom of his elders. Those whose counsel Rehoboam spurned, after all, were not just any old men. These men who had been involved in government for decades. They were the very ancients who had provided guidance to Israel's monarch. Rehoboam still did not get the message. he still sends out the tax collectors to collect the taxes anyway. It did not go well with the tax collectors. Verse 18. Then King Rehoboam sent Adoram, who was in charge of the revenue, but all Israel stoned him with stones, and he died. It's a normal response to tax collectors. Therefore King Rehoboam mounted his chariot and fled in haste to flee to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Now it came to pass that when all Israel heard that Jeroboam had come back, they sent for him and called him to the congregation, same words used before, by the way, Kahal, the Kol Kahal Israel, the whole congregation of Israel, and made him king over Kol Israel, over Israel. There was none who followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. They started thinking the tribe of Benjamin absorbed into the tribe of Judah. That's why that. Are there any questions about the material so far? I think I've got it. I think I've got about 5 minutes, if that's the kids come in. Yes, Joseph.
The issue about the Levites, that they were still distributed amongst, 11 /10 tribes. So do we know what happened to them?
Well,
Priesthood, with all of this politics.
Some of the Levites who are still distributed are going to become part of the new shrine at the two shrines at Dan and Bethel. Okay, but remember that after the construction of the Temple of Jerusalem, most of the priests moved to Jerusalem. So when they talk about the 10 tribes, they're not really talking about Levi. They're taking the tribe of Joseph into Ephraim and Manasseh and counting that as 2 tribes. One of the times I was giving a radio interview years ago, and it was a call-in radio. Ask Father Pat anything you want. So somebody can't call in, want to know why in the tribes that are listed in the Book of Revelation, the tribe of Dan was not mentioned. I don't remember what I said, but I have no idea. I couldn't tell you now why the tribe of Dan. It's just not one of those things I ever gave a lot of thought to. But anyway, I think that's what they mean by 10 tribes.
Father,
Just Father.
I'm thinking of a line in Chronicles where it talks about the faithful priests, the faithful Levites moved to Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. Is that what?
That is especially an idea strong in Chronicles. So because Chronicles is written after the reforms of Hezekiah and Josiah, where they discouraged any kind of priestly functions taking place. So even the priests so they couldn't offer sacrifice, because sacrifice could only be done from Hezekiah and Josiah on. Sacrifice could only be offered in Jerusalem. So that'd be a big theme in Chronicles. You've probably been reading a certain commentary on
I have been
Chronicles.
reading a certain commentary.
Any other? Okay, let me go ahead and start then, because if the classes are still going on, Now Rehoboam's reign of 17 years knew its ups and downs, mainly downs. 5 years after the story narrated here, Pharaoh Shishak, founder of Egypt's 22nd dynasty, invaded the Holy Land and took pretty much whatever attracted his eye. You have this text in the 5th year of King Rehoboam. Did I put that in your? Okay. In the 5th year of King Rehoboam, Shishak, king of Egypt, came up against Jerusalem. He took away the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house. He took away everything. He also took away the shields of gold that Solomon had made. The sacred text goes on to remark, King Rehoboam made in their place shields of bronze. By setting up bronze shields in the temple to replace the golden shields of Solomon, Rehoboam enacted a truly wretched symbolism. Some of the ancients, Daniel, Hesiod, Ovid, spoke of an historical decline from a golden age to a silver age to a bronze age. No one disputes, of course, that Solomon's was a golden age. However, the reign of Rehoboam's heir was not just a declension to silver, but all the way to bronze. The lunge, when it came at once, was at once in a single generation. It was all gone in one generation by one foolish man. Rehoboam remained, Josephus tells us, a proud and foolish man. He never recovered from the singular folly of his first political decision. After Shishak's invasion, his thin, pathetic shadow of his father and grandfather reigned over a humiliating Egyptian suzerainty for a dozen more years. Like every fool, he had a heart problem. The final word about Rehoboam asserts, 2 Chronicles 12, he did evil, for he did not set his heart to seek the Lord. Now, are there any questions for me? Yes, Father.
In Romans 11, when Paul talks about all Israel, is he referring to, is that phrase intentional?
As a very biblical term, of course, for him, all Israel includes the Christians.
Sure. He says all Israel shall be saved, and that's a point that confuses commentators quite often.
Are you thinking of many commentators on Romans who were confused?
No. not anyone. Not anyone in this room at the moment.
Okay. Thank you so much. Glory to the Father, through the Son, in the Holy Spirit, now and ever. To God who is, who was, and is to come at the end of time. Amen.
Thanks, Father.
Welcome, buddy. Next week we'll take the division of the kingdoms.